This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and receive exclusive perks. Link in the description. Let's talk about some real trains. So in the last video, I talked a lot about Hiro. I briefly mentioned how Hiro's real-life prototype is too modern for the type of character that he's meant to be. And that got me thinking, what would be a more appropriate prototype for him? And then that got me thinking, what about other characters? There are so many characters in Thomas and Friends. The official count has to be in the 200s at least. Hell, 300s maybe. Something that is pretty unique about this show is, no matter how cartoony or unrealistic that the show got, they still maintained, till the end, that every character was based on a real-life locomotive. That link to real life makes Thomas quite special, and it's definitely fueled many of its fans' interest in real trains. Very rarely was an engine introduced that had no links to anything out there in the world. But with that said, I think it's safe to say that not every choice was a winner. And that's what we are discussing in depth today. Some of the more puzzling prototype choices for Thomas characters. Ones that make you go, why do you look like that? It could be from a multitude of criteria. Maybe the engine is too modern or too old for their appearance in the show's timeline. Or maybe the type of locomotive they are doesn't really match their personality that well. Or maybe they're just weird. There's quite a few oddballs in Thomas's world, and I thought it'd be fun to go through what I personally think are some of the more baffling ones. I'll give you a brief history of the character, a brief history of the engine that they're based on, we'll go into why that basis doesn't really work, and we'll speculate on why the show might have chosen that engine. Then, we'll come up with proposals of what might work better. The catch here being that we can't change any of these characters' established histories or traits. Some of these are going to be a challenge. I won't be covering every weird oddball in Thomas's world, but hey, if this video does well, maybe I'll do a part 2. And hey, if you disagree with any of these, well, that's fine. I am by no means an expert with real train history, so if you have any other ideas that may work better, share them below. Let's start a discussion. Or maybe you like these characters as they are, and you don't think they need to be tampered with. And to that I say, this is all just for fun. Let us have our fun. Alright, let's start this with a tame one. Emily. Emily is, in my opinion, the tamest example on this list. Because technically she does work in universe as is, but it requires a bit of a stretch of the imagination. Let me explain. Emily was introduced in the Season 7 premiere, Emily's New Coaches, as a new engine on Sodor.
Thomas, meet Emily.
Hello. Hello to you.
She was given 2 passenger coaches, which she pulls regularly, although she has been shown to haul goods on occasion. Emily is uniquely a single, which means she has 2 large driving wheels, which she has been shown to be quite proud of.
He's bound to give it to an express engine.
Or one with big wheels, said Emily.
In the UK dub of the show, Emily has consistently always been Scottish. Michelangelis gave her a Scottish accent in the model era.
Oh, I'm worried about Henry. It's no nice to copy the way others speak. You hurt Salty's feelings.
And this continued into CGI when Teresa Gallagher started voicing her.
Trembling tracks! Who was that?
Emily's striking design is based on the iconic Stirling single of the Great Northern Railway. This class of 422s were designed by Patrick Stirling, who was Scottish, which is probably why Emily is Scottish. These engines never worked in Scotland though, nor were built there. First built in Doncaster in 1870, these locomotives hauled fast expresses along the Great Northern's main line between London and York. The story of why this engine was chosen for Emily is pretty interesting. During production of Season 6, one of the crew members had obtained a live steam model of a Stirling single. Other crew members noted how its unique curved casing from its smoke box to its cylinders made it look like the engine had woman's hair. This gave them the idea that this engine would be the perfect candidate for a female engine character. And the rest is history. Emily was drawn up and was built for a TV debut the following year in Season 7. Before I get further into it, we should probably discuss what time period that the show takes place in, because this is going to be important for Emily and a few other engines in this video. Now, we are talking about the TV series universe, not the books, so it's all intentionally vague and unclear what year this all takes place in. But I've always assumed that the show, following Season 4 or so, has always taken place in this frozen state of the mid to late 60s or so, clearly near the end of steam in Britain and around the rise of dieselization, but also nowhere close to modern day. We're still notably in the past. No one uses cell phones, computers are never seen on desks, the cars and vehicles all look old, and we usually never see modern-day traction like Azumas or Pendolinos or something. Even in the show's final season, Kenji, a bullet train, was touted as a brand new development in railway traction, a Zero-series Shinkansen that first entered service in 1964. I'd say it's pretty safe to assume that the show has stayed in this unmoving stasis of the mid to late 60s, with minor contradictions here and there. I think we can all agree on that, right? Okay, now back to Emily. So, what's the issue with the Sterling single exactly? Well, to put it simply, it's just too old. The final Sterling singles were retired in 1916, a whole 5 decades before Emily would have come to Sodor. Oliver is present in Emily's debut story, which means she could not have arrived any time before him. The Sterling singles are just too old to still be around and working in the current day time period of the series. However, Emily is low on this list because she does have one major saving grace. There is a preserved Sterling single, number 1, which has steamed and operated in preservation. So it's not impossible for a Sterling single to have made its way to Sodor in the 60s. Who's to say Emily isn't the preserved one? I guess you could also say she's somehow a second one that happened to survive till the 60s. Nothing's really impossible in this universe, and there could definitely be a story there. But realistically, it's pretty improbable. So, let's put this to the test. Is there an engine out there that fits all the criteria for Emily's character without changing anything we know about her and makes a bit more sense timeline-wise? This potential loco needs to be one with big wheels, as that has been a point of pride for Emily in some episodes. So ideally, another single, or maybe some sort of 440. Emily is consistently Scottish throughout the UK dub of the show, so it should probably be something with Scottish roots. And the biggest hurdle here, it has to be an engine that was around and operating in the 60s, preferably sometime after Oliver came to Sodor. Well, the way I see it, there's only one candidate that fits all of these requirements, and that's the Caledonian Railways number 123. Designed by Dougal Drummond, 123 was a one-off design built in 1886 as an exhibition locomotive. Like Emily, this engine is a single, with one set of large driving wheels and inside valve gear. After the Edinburgh exhibition, it was acquired by the Caledonian Railway in Scotland. It was the only single-wheeler in Scotland, and put in several years of work on the main line, as well as participating in the Great Race to the North in 1888 and 1895. Following World War I, it hauled the railway director's saloon coach, and later finished its working life under LMS ownership, manning light trains. It was withdrawn in 1935, likely the last working single in the world. But its life didn't end there. 123 was restored to working order in 1958 by British Railways, and continued to haul enthusiast trains across Britain until the end of steam in Scotland. After that, it was placed in the Glasgow Transport Museum, where it resides today. But hey, maybe in this alternate universe, it was sent to Sodor where steam was still allowed to thrive, and continued its working life hauling light passenger trains. 123 definitely ticks all the criteria for Emily. It's a single, it has those big driving wheels that Emily is so proud of, it's actually Scottish, and it makes quite a bit more sense timeline-wise. It even still has sloped wing plates under its smokebox, giving it that appearance of having woman's hair. Even so, I still gotta say, I think the Sterling single is just too iconic, and it is so hard to remove it from Emily. Almost feels illegal to. I only wish the TV series had dived a bit more into Emily's backstory. They had ample opportunity to, and they never did. What exactly did she do all those years before coming to Sodor? I'd love to know. Okay, this was a fun test, but Emily is a tame one. Let's move on to a more difficult engine. Whiff. Alright, here's a fun one. Whiff the garbage engine. Whiff was introduced in Season 11's Emily's Rubbish. He is the railway's garbage engine, meaning he collects trucks of rubbish. In the CGI series, it's established that he brings the rubbish to a waste dump. He lives here, and sometimes works in the facility sorting trucks around. As a hard-working industrial engine, he's often quite grubby, and has a notable odor, hence his name.
My name's Whiff because I'm a bit smelly.
He doesn't care much about his appearance, but it's impossible to not like him. He seems to just get along with everyone. Whiff is based on Aerolite, an extremely unique tank engine built for the Northeastern Railway. Aerolite was built to haul the Northeastern's chief mechanical engineer's saloon coach. Its work was very undemanding, and it never hauled revenue-earning trains. It was first built as a very primitive-looking 222 in 1869, then was rebuilt again with side tanks added in 1886, then was rebuilt a third time into a 422 in 1892, and finally was completely rebuilt into a 224 in 1902, and it remains in this state today. It was retired in 1933 and was preserved at the LNER's museum in York, where it still is, and has never steamed in preservation. There is simply no other engine out there that resembles Aerolite, because, well, it's been rebuilt so many times that it doesn't even resemble what it started life as. And it was built and rebuilt over the years to do a very specific task. Aerolite and Whiff even share the same number, 66, and this sort of indicates that Whiff is meant to be Aerolite. I don't think I really have to explain why Aerolite is such an inappropriate prototype for Whiff. I'll never understand why the show opted for its industrial, grubby, hard-working, goods-hauling garbage engine character to be based on a unique Regal 224 locomotive that never hauled wagons and was really only capable of hauling a single coach. I'd like to believe that it was some sort of inside joke with the show crew, but I can't confirm that. So, is there another engine out there that suits Whiff's character better? Well, what's our criteria? Whiff works in a waste dump, an industrial area, so he should probably be some sort of industrial tank engine. However, he does haul trains and travels some distance to collect rubbish around Sodor, so he needs to be something a little larger, capable of pulling several wagons and traveling those longer distances. Honestly, I think any sort of larger industrial would fit the bill, but I'm going to go with the Uglies. These were a batch of 9060 saddle tank engines, designed by Robert Stevenson and Company in 1950 for the Stewart and Lloyd's Steelworks. The company extended their line to nearby quarries and needed larger tank engines like these specifically to run these longer hauls. They resemble the more common austerity 060s by Hunslet, but with shorter saddle tanks that end just before their larger fireboxes. They look a little unusual as a result, hence their nicknames, the Uglies. 5 of them are preserved, one notably with the name Ugly. How flattering. I think this works perfectly for Whiff. It's an industrial designed specifically to run trains to and from its base, and I think the ugly design of these suits his character. He's supposed to be a bit weird looking, after all. The Uglies lasted in service till 1969. 4 of them were scrapped. Not at all a stretch to believe that one of these scrapped ones was sold to Sodor after withdrawal. This is fun. On to the next one. Connor and Caitlin. Oh ho ho, here we go! Connor and Caitlin, the Streamliners. Connor and Caitlin were introduced in the 2013 movie King of the Railway. With Ulstead Castle's grand reopening to the public, Connor and Caitlin were brought on to run a non-stop service between the castle and the mainland. These two large engines are streamlined in sleek bullet-like casings and are very fast. So fast that they give Gordon and Spencer a run for their money.
Who was that? Don't ask me!
Their speed is a point of pride for them, and it makes them rather confident. Connor is based on the extremely iconic New York Central Hudsons, the beautiful streamlined 464 tender locomotives that hauled New York Central's premier express services like the 20th Century Limited and the Empire State Express. First built in 1927, there were 275 Hudsons in total, but only a select group of them received the Art Deco streamlined casings designed by Henry Dreyfuss. Despite being one of the most celebrated American steam locomotives ever, none survived to preservation. A tragic loss. Caitlin, however, is based on the Baltimore and Ohio P7 class Pacific. Also first built in 1927, only 20 of these massive engines existed. Caitlin is based specifically on number 5304, President Monroe, which was rebuilt in 1937 with a streamlined casing. Others were streamlined at different points too, though the design differed slightly. One P7 does survive in preservation, number 5300, though it is not a streamlined example. Both engines' designs were altered to accommodate the characters' faces. Their headlamps were moved below them onto their front shrouding. The decision to make Connor and Caitlin streamliners, I think, was meant to tie in with the whole knights in shining armor theming of King of the Railway. Prior to them, the only streamliner in the show was Spencer, but Spencer is an A4 class, which was designed with a streamlined body. Not like these two, which are normal locomotives with shrouding added on top of them, so they kind of are wearing a sort of armor, so to speak. So why don't these engines work for these two? Well, again, I think it's pretty obvious. These giant American engines look totally out of place on Sodor. Never mind them looking out of place, or how they even got to Sodor. They're just too tall for British loading gauge. As shown to us on a couple occasions, their route takes them through Henry's Tunnel. Realistically, that tunnel would probably not have the clearance for such tall and wide engines. In real life, all the Hudsons were withdrawn by 1957, and the P7s in 58. Neither would have been around still in the current day of the show, which, again, is around the mid to late 60s or so. And, just to make this all even more confusing, these very clearly American engines have Irish accents.
Hello there, I'm Connor.
And I'm Caitlin.
This is our test run and time trial. We're having a little race. Care to join us?
So they're American engines that live in England and are Irish. Right. Some fans have theorized that the reason is because they were built by Irish immigrants. Which is true, a lot of Irish Americans worked on the railroads back then. Which is cool, but I don't know how actually intentional that was. Despite all of that, Connor and Caitlin are still pretty fun, distinct characters in their own right, and each have successfully carried episodes on their own. They're pretty well-written characters, honestly, but it's undeniable. Two giant American streamliners look ungodly out of place on Sodor, and timeline-wise, they don't really make much sense here either. So, what would suit these two better? So what do we need to look for here? Well, these engines definitely need to be fast, and they need to be streamliners. Being streamlined is pretty essential to them in their debut appearance. Considering the show takes place in England, they probably should be British built and fit the British loading gauge. So pretty simple, a couple of fast British streamliners is what we're after. I feel like this is a completely obvious pick, but I'm going with it anyway. I propose both of them being Coronation-class locomotives from the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, designed by the one and only William Stanier. The Coronations were first outshopped in 1937. They were large, fast, powerful, and easily topped 100 miles per hour. They were built with an air-smoothed, bullet-like streamlined casing to help them cut through the air and increase their speed. For a time, the first of the class, number 6220 Coronation, held the world speed record at 114 miles per hour. Following World War II, all the Coronations had their casings removed to make maintenance easier, and they resembled more traditional steam locomotives. All new builds following were built without the casing. One of the preserved examples, Duchess of Hamilton, was re-streamlined in 2009. The class survived till nearly the end of steam in the mid-60s, much more suitable for the Thomas timeline. Once they were preserved for the Ulfsted service, we could say that the two were re-streamlined for publicity purposes, just like Hamilton was. What I love about the Coronations for Connor and Caitlin is that their colors are still accurate. The Coronations did in fact wear blue and maroon. Just make Connor a blue one and Caitlin maroon. Perfect. I love the idea of them being LMS engines, as the LMS were the direct competitors to the LNER. The Coronations actually took the speed record from the LNER in 1937, which gives a little historical accuracy to Gordon and Spencer being a bit intimidated by them.
Well, I have to get back to Knapford, actually.
Yes, I'm afraid I have work to do too. We never race.
No.
Suit yourselves!
Since the Coronation's smoke boxes were underneath their shells, I always thought it'd be kinda neat if their faces were also under the casing, but with little slits cut into them so that they could see out while they were speeding along. They'd look even more like knights in shining armor this way. Probably pretty hard to translate that into a toy though. Funnily enough, there is a Coronation character in the show, in the form of Duchess, introduced a lot later in season 24. However, she is one of the non-streamlined examples, quite different visually. Connor and Caitlin are fun ones. I like these two a lot. Moving on. Philip. Philip. One of the more polarizing characters introduced in an overall good era. Philip made his debut in Season 19's The Little Engine Who Raced Ahead as Knapford's new permanent station pilot. He is a small four-wheeled box cab with a ton of energy. As a younger character, he's very eager to do more, and he has a fascination with the bigger engines like Gordon.
Whoa!
Hello, big engine. I mean, Gordon.
Edward had taken a liking to Philip, once comparing him to a little blue engine that you may have heard of before.
Reminds me of a little tank engine who wanted to see the world.
And eventually, he became Philip's mentor. Philip is rather proud of being a box cab, and his boxy look is something that he once bonded with Toby over.
Hello, another box cab? I thought I was the only box cab on Sodor.
Philip is just weird, man. Because seriously, what the heck is he? The front of him and his overall proportions are based on the Pennsylvania Railroad Class A6 box cab, complete with that headlamp on the top. But then the back of him is what appears to be the front end of number 8835, a prototype box cab. Like what? Why? This guy has two front ends. Why is he a blend of the two? Why not just be one or the other? It's pretty clear why this is such a baffling prototype choice. I think they went with these because they wanted Philip to specifically be a box cab. Maybe just because it's something different, or maybe because it would make for an easy toy to produce. I mean, just look at him. He's a block. And as far as I'm aware, there weren't many diesel box cabs in the UK, so they went with an American one. Well, two American ones. It appears that both of these box cab designs were built in the 20s. The first two A6s didn't seem to make it past 1929, but the last of the three was refitted with a different motor and lived a long life till 1962 before being scrapped. I couldn't find a hard withdrawal date for 8835. It was a prototype locomotive, so I don't think it lasted that long. I think we can all agree that it's bizarre an American box cab at all made its way to Sodor. And as is the same case with Connor and Caitlin, despite being a clearly American prototype, Philip inexplicably speaks with a British accent.
Don't worry.
No.
I won't.
Why is he British? You specifically chose an American design for him. Give him an American accent. Why not? Finding an alternate basis for Philip is going to be a bit of a challenge. So let's first list out our criteria. Well, he definitely needs to be a box cab of some sort. That is a pretty defining quirk of his. He needs to be something small-ish, as others often refer to him as little. But as a station pilot, he needs to be something big enough to be capable of moving several wagons and coaches at once. So ideally, some sort of yard shunter. As he also speaks with a British accent, he should also probably be a British prototype. I'm going to take some liberties with this one and propose a London and Northeastern Railway Y1 class box cab. That's right, I'm making Philip a steam engine. I could just as easily make Philip a four-wheel diesel shunter like a Class 02 or a Class 06 or something. Hell, I even considered a Ruston, but none felt right to me. I feel Philip being a box cab is way more imperative to his character than being a diesel. And, unfortunately for us, diesel box cabs, at least ones capable of doing Philip's work, just weren't really a thing in the UK. The Y1s were first built by Sentinel in 1925. They were superheated, chain-driven vertical boiler engines. Their light weight and ability to be operated by one person made them ideal for yard work, and so they were used as shunters in yards all across the LNER's system. A variation of these were double-geared, and those ones were classified as Y3s, but they were virtually identical to the Y1s. The final surviving ones were withdrawn in the 60s, with only one surviving in preservation. So hey, perhaps one of the scrapped ones made its way to Sodor not long after withdrawal, Now the only thing that I don't love about this is that it makes Philip somewhat old by the time he gets to Sodor. I mean, being young and inexperienced is another big part of his character too. But hey, the box cabs he's actually based on were also built in the 20s. And age in general is weird in Thomas. I mean, James is technically older than Toby by 2 years. Explain that one. I've honestly never thought twice about Philip's design until this. And yeah, he's definitely a head-scratcher. But you know who's even more of a curious case? Hiro. Hiro, the engine who sparked this whole video idea. Hiro was introduced in the 2009 movie Hero of the Rails. Hiro is a wise and observant engine. He is from Japan and was built there a long time ago. As the movie tells us, he came to Sodor when the railway was new. He was one of the first engines on the island, at least as far as he knew, and he didn't see anyone else. But as an engine from Japan, parts to mend him were hard to come by. As Hiro grew older and worn, he became harder and harder to fix, and was eventually abandoned on a siding, and a woodland grew around him. Thomas, in current day, rediscovered Hiro, and with his help got the old engine working again. Following his restoration, Hiro went back to Japan for a while, only to return to Sodor. After a several year stay on Sodor, he went back to Japan for good with Kenji, and that was the last time we saw him. Hiro was based on the incredibly recognizable D51 class of Japanese national railways. This strong goods engine was the most mass-produced locomotive in Japan, with over 1,000 built. Holy crap, Lois! And over 170 of these still exist today in preservation. You can't walk 10 steps in Japan without bumping into one of these. Hiro's number, 51, is in reference to the class number. The reason why the D51 does not fit Hiro's backstory is simple. It's just too modern. The D51s were first built in 1936, a good few decades after the Northwestern Railway was opened and running. It's just simply impossible for him to have been one of the first engines on Sodor. I think the show crew went with the D51 for Hiro simply because it's one of the most, if not the most, iconic steam locomotive of Japan, and they wanted their Japanese character to be recognizable. Fair enough, I love the D51s. They're very smart, good-looking engines. But it's very, very strange that this fairly modern engine was selected for a character who is meant to be old. The D51 simply doesn't fit the bill. Finding a suitable engine is going to be an absolute challenge. So, what's our criteria? Hiro is from Japan, he says as much, so it has to be an engine built in Japan, not a British or American export, a fully Japanese-built locomotive. The engine has to have been built early enough to have come to Sodor prior to the opening of the Northwestern Railway, so sometime in the early 20th century, or even before that if possible. Hiro was also quite strong and hauls long-distance goods trains, so this probably should be a goods or a mixed-traffic loco of some sort. So, with all this in mind, is there an engine out there that fits this list of very specific requirements? Well, the answer is yes, there absolutely is. I present to you the Japanese Government Railways Class 9600. This 280 goods locomotive was the first successful mass-produced locomotive in Japan, with a grand total of 770 built. And you wanna know the best part? The year it was first built was 1913, the year before the Northwestern Railway formed. At least in the Railway Series canon. In this alternate take, perhaps we can create a headcanon around the first controller of the Northwestern Railway in the TV series, who was Granddad Hat, as the 2013 character Bible that the show used calls him. He's the older-looking Topham that you see at the docks in Hiro's flashback. Let's say that he served overseas, just like Charles Hat did in the Railway Series canon. He served in Japan, and made friends and connections with Japanese government railways. Years later, the news reached Japan that Granddad Hat would be the controller of a new railway on Sodor, and as a token of goodwill, Japanese government railways gifted Hat with one of their brand spanking new 9600 class locomotives. The engine, named Hiro, was tested in Japan with several of his classmates, and after proving to be the strongest of the batch,
I was the strongest engine at home.
Was shipped off to Sodor. He arrived in 1914, before the loaned engines like Edward arrived. Hiro was regauged and helped build the railway before working a line separate from the eventual other Sodor residents. And from there, we know the story. Parts to mend him were hard to come by, and he was eventually abandoned and forgotten about. Some 30 or so years later, Thomas stumbled across him by accident, and Hiro was restored to working order by Granddad Hat's grandson, the current day Sir Topham Hatt. Upon his restoration, Hiro went back to Japan for a short time for a publicity tour, and then came back to Sodor to serve as a working engine again. Boom! It all works now, and Hiro's backstory is not altered whatsoever. Credit for this proposal goes to my good friend Nimmo. You may know him as WR Duke Dog. He introduced the JNR 8620 class to me, and subsequently, the 9600 class. I was just so taken aback by how well this fit into everything. Thanks for all your help, Nemo. I cannot believe that you made Hiro work. His blue sky is linked below. Go follow him. On to the even weirder. Hurricane. Hurricane's a real doozy. Introduced in the 2017 movie Journey Beyond Sodor, Hurricane is a big, brawny engine that works at the Mainland Steel Company with his partner in crime, Frankie.
And my name is Hurricane. You know, like a storm. Whoa!
In spite of his name and appearance, Hurricane is actually the gentler one of the two. Even so, the two still held Thomas hostage at the steelworks because they were desperately in need of help there. Thomas tried to escape, but the two always found him, and Hurricane always dragged him back. Hurricane is based on a rather distinct engine, the Great Eastern Railway's Decapod, the first ever O10O in Britain. This giant tank engine was built in 1902 for purely political purposes. The Great Eastern wanted to block an electric line from being built, so they constructed an engine in an attempt to prove steam traction could accelerate trains the same rate as electric locos. The engine required a huge boiler to build enough pressure to accelerate quickly, and the end result was this behemoth of a tank engine. It performed as desired, but after its trial, it wasn't really needed anymore. So only 4 years later, it was completely rebuilt, and I use the word rebuilt loosely, into an 080 goods locomotive. What a travesty. The decapod was numbered 20. Hurricane shares this number, indicating that Hurricane is meant to be the same engine, although in this universe, was never rebuilt. So, why is the decapod a weird choice for this character? Well, for one, it was designed to haul passenger trains. Its whole reason for existing was just to prove it could accelerate a passenger train quickly. By all means, this locomotive was designed to run on a main line, not to work in a cramped industrial space with tight curves. Hurricane's CGI model itself was even too long for the steelwork sets, that they had to modify him. They removed a chunk of his side rods between his third and fourth axles, turning him into this weird articulated 0640, just so his wheelbase could make the clearance. I think the show crew chose the decapod for Hurricane for 2 reasons. One, because it's a giant, burly, buff-looking engine, which suited the character's imposing demeanor. He's meant to be the bronze of the duo, the bouncer who takes care of the dirty work. And 2, because it's an experimental. Journey Beyond Sodor heavily features the theme of weird outcasts finding strength in their talents, and using their quirks to overcome adversity. Maybe at some point in production, Hurricane was meant to be one of the experimental engines, but it didn't make it into the final version, so making him one ultimately turned out to be pretty pointless. So, is there another engine out there that suits him better? Well, let's look at our criteria. As the bronze of the duo, Hurricane definitely needs to be some sort of large, beefy engine, something that looks imposing. He also works at a steelworks, so he should be an industrial type. At the very least, something with a short wheelbase to navigate all the tight curves of the sets. So, what fits this? I'm going to propose the new Standard 18s. These giant 060 saddle tanks were built by Bagnall in 1951 to serve the Steel Company of Wales in Port Talbot. The steel company wanted to start using diesels, and they ordered 3 tank engines to compete with them. Bagnall delivered what they called their new Standard 18s, which they touted as the most modern industrial steam engine out there. They were somewhat experimental in a sense, having exposed external valve gear, something rather unusual for an 060 saddle tank. 2 of the 3 are preserved today, with the names Vulcan and Victor. I think these are an absolutely perfect candidate for Hurricane. They check every box. They're large, they're beefy, they're imposing, they actually worked in the steelworks, and they technically fit the bill as experimental engines with their unique valve gear, if you really want to play up that aspect. 1 more to go. And the most baffling prototype choice ever in Thomas, in my opinion, is... Samson. Samson just pisses me off, man. I can't wrap my head around this guy. Samson made his debut in Season 18's Marion and the Dinosaurs. This was the first part of a multi-episode arc, which covered Samson being an engine from the mainland, and occasionally brings goods trains to Sodor. He is a very strong engine, hence his name, and with that strength comes quite an ego.
Been asked to help out with a big order of stone from the Blue Mountain Quarry. Fat Controller wants it moved quickly and efficiently. Said I was the only engine for the job.
Later revealed in Season 20, Samson also has a brake van called Bradford. Bradford appears to have served in the War Department, hence his paint job, and his rather officious attitude.
Right, you horrible lot! I'm in charge now, so no bumping and none of you a cheek!
The engine that they chose for Samson is a very unique flat-topped saddle tank built by Barclays & Company circa 1874. Very little is actually known about it, and, as far as I'm aware, this is the only photo that exists of it. It worked on the Cleator and Workington Junction Railway, as its number 2, and I don't think we really know what happened to it afterwards. How on earth did the crew even find this engine? Samson is so frustrating as a character to me, because I feel there's 2 very different ideas of what he's supposed to be, actively working against each other. On one hand, I get why they chose the tiny saddle tank for him. It's a pathetic-looking, ancient, dinky thing. One of those being named Samson, a name commonly associated with great strength, and with a large, brash ego to match, is inherently funny. The name is ironic. He's like a joke character. It's like seeing a tiny, cute dog with a name tag that says Thor. It's not dissimilar to what they did with Steven, actually. This really old, outdated engine that thinks he's a hotshot, when really he's just kind of pathetic and laughable in modern day. And if that's how Samson was written, then I'd say he works just fine as a character. But he isn't. Samson is depicted as actually being a strong engine. He hauls long-distance goods trains. He hauls heavy trains of stone. He even pulled the express without even knowing it once. By all means, Samson is supposed to be a very strong engine, with a name to match. So, why is he a dinky, ancient saddle tank? The engine that they chose for this character, it just doesn't work. At least for every other character that we've talked about in this video, I can understand the thought process. You do get a sense of what type of character they're all meant to be just from their appearance. Connor and Caitlin look like fast, confident engines. Hurricane looks like a brawny bouncer. Whiff looks like a blissful dweeb that others look down on. I cannot say the same with Samson. I can't help but feel like there was something lost in translation, or there was some sort of miscommunication when conceptualizing him. I wouldn't be shocked if Andrew Brenner and Davey Moore wrote his episodes with the intent that Samson was some big, strong engine, only for that to not be the case when the CGI model was finalized. I'd love to see original concept art for him to get a better idea of what exactly happened here. So, what would be an appropriate alternate prototype? Since we don't want to change what happens in Samson's stories, he's going to need to be an actually big, strong goods engine. He needs to be one that is capable of running long-distance trains from the mainland to Sodor. He also has Bradford, so it should also, preferably, be something that'd make sense for a natural pairing with a War Department brakeman. To me, the answer is obvious. I'm proposing the War Department Austerity 280 tender engine. These goods engines were built in the hundreds during World War II, starting in 1943. A grand total of 935 of them existed. They were based greatly on the LMS 8F class, though with some design changes to make them more economical during the war effort, including a parallel boiler and a round-topped firebox. They ran goods all over the country during the war, and after the war, many were sold off to railway companies. Several saw use overseas, including the Netherlands, Hong Kong, Sweden, and even one went to America. Now, doesn't a big engine like this suit Samson much better? I could see this hauling heavy stone trains from the Blue Mountain Quarry, or taking long-distance goods trains to Sodor, or pulling the express without even realizing it. Samson, serving for the War Department, also could explain how he and Bradford met and formed their friendship. And there you have it, folks. That is 8 characters that I had proposed alternate bases for. This was a very fun challenge. I'd love to know all of your thoughts. Do you agree with some of these, or are there some other engines that you think fit these characters better? Let us all know in the comments below. This week I want to spotlight an oldie. This is Fight for Survival by DCG12B. This video is 12 years old now, but I consider it a classic. I mentioned earlier how I'd love to know what Emily did all those years before coming to Sodor, and this story tries to answer that. It is a story about how Emily, a Sterling single, managed to escape the Cutter's Torch back in 1916, and all the people and friends that she made in the 50 years between withdrawal and being saved by the Fat Controller. It's a sweet take on her origins, and it's stories like this that really make me wish that the actual TV series had done something similar. Go give it a watch. I'm actually quite ahead of schedule on videos for this month. At the time of this video being posted, I have already started on the next one. It will be discussing Thomas's 80th anniversary and some of the amazing announcements that we've gotten so far, and a couple of my own predictions. 2025 is no 2015 in terms of new content, but it does seem like that this year is shaping up to be a pretty special one. That video will be out maybe next week, more than likely the week after that. We'll see how far along I get in editing. It will be out in February though, that is for sure, so look out for it. I don't have a set plan for a video after that one, though I do have some ideas. I've thought about continuing the one fact for every episode series, this time covering seasons 8 to 16, or maybe another Every Basis Explained, but for the TV characters. Another idea that I've been playing with is regarding engine liveries, which could be fun. You all tell me what sort of video that you'd like to see below. I'm very curious what you'd all like to see from me. And that's about it from me. Thanks for watching everyone, and stay safe out there. Bye-bye!